Good evening. My name is Ralph. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Ralph.
I have a Zoom group. It's called the Main Purpose Group. We meet on every night on Zoom at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time during this COVID times. And when this nightmare gets over, we're hopefully still going to be on Zoom and meet face to face on Sunday nights. We have a dinner and then we have a speaker. It starts at 6. And then if you're ever in Connecticut, stop by. And then on Tuesday, we do a line by line big book study. And it's a lot more exciting than it sounds, believe me. What we're going to be doing over the next 4 months is we're going to be using this book as a tool. I was taught that the big book is a roadmap to a higher power of your understanding. And the first part of this book, as we're going to be talking about, is the allergy. Okay, so when reading this book with somebody, we try and find some of these inconsistencies. Did this happen to me? Okay, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't treat the allergy at all. So if you're new and you came here thinking that we're going to teach you how to drink, you're in the wrong spot. There's absolutely nothing that Alcoholics Anonymous does to help you with the allergy. There's no secret remedy if you're a real alcoholic. But before we get started, I just want to invite God in. And I want to just say a quick set-aside prayer. And the reason why we do this is we set aside what we think we know for a new experience. And Adam and I both are seekers, and we go to lots of other big book studies. We hear other people. And, for a long time when I was new, I was always thinking about, in a big book study, yep, I say that. Yep, I got that underlined too or whatever. But we're always looking for new stuff. So if you just go with me for a second and say this prayer, and hopefully you're not going to forget about what you know, but just take what you know and set it over here for a new experience. Then we're going to get started. It's going to be a lot of fun. So here we go. God, please enable me to set aside everything I know for an open mind and a new experience. Help me see the truth about my physical craving after I start to drink. Adam, take it away with the doctor's opinion.
Thank you very much. Adam, I am an alcoholic. You guys can hear me? Just a brief introduction, and as it relates to me, for anybody that's new, when I got out of my 28th residential treatment center, the guy that was running the detox asked me to come back to the hospital next week and tell all the patients how I managed to survive a whole week without drinking. And he dismissed me like he didn't care, and I got this big resentment. And for the next 8 years, I sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic from South LA County to the West Valley to tell a bunch of strangers in a detox that didn't care how I stayed sober another week. And what happened is I was tricked into service. And what I realized later when I was taking people through the doctor's opinion is this similar experience when Bill Wilson had got out of his third trip through treatment. As we've read Bill's story, he was depressed. He'd lost everything in life worthwhile. And he gets an idea, a very simple idea. Maybe if he goes back into the hospital and talks to some of the patients, he'll feel better. That's all it was. And as we know from the story, as we're going to read today, he calls Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth, by the way, is a double board certified physician. He's certified as a neurologist and a psychiatrist. And Silkworth basically says, you want to do what, Bill? He had never heard of anything. Why would he let a patient come back and talk to patients in his hospital? And we're going to talk a little bit more about Silkworth's credentials as we go through this. But what Silkworth says is he allowed Bill Wilson to come back into the hospital and talk to some of the patients. And what he saw from 1935 to 1939, he said was absolutely amazing. He was so amazed with the process that he saw between those two dates that if you look at this first endorsement, which we're going to read today, where it actually ends with, you could absolutely rely on anything these men say about themselves, was an endorsement letter, which Ralph had sent me the original letter, and I have it on my phone now, written by a double board certified physician, giving Bill Wilson really a letter of credibility that he could virtually go into any hospital with that letter and talk to people that suffered from alcoholism. And that's how powerful.
Muted.
Coming back to that hospital was. So we're going to start with that. Ralph, do you want to start right off in the beginning and then we'll go from there? And
Sure.
I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go along.
Okay. The doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader be interested in the medical estimate plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed return to health. So a question you might ask yourself is, do I believe that convincing testimony must surely come? Okay, you could start asking questions that, do I believe that this book could help me? A well-known doctor, chief physician at a national prominent hospital specializing in alcohol and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended to a patient who had been a competent businessman of good earnings capacity, was an alcoholic type I had come to regard as hopeless. You write a question mark next to that, and you could go back and ask yourself, am I hopeless? In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning the possibility means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conception to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they may do so likewise to still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This men and over 100 have appeared to recover. And if those of you have read the book before, on the bottom of page 7, Bill, we don't have to go there. Bill was realizing he's so depressed and ready to die that he's caught up in self-pity on page 7. And then if you go a few pages later, at the end of his story, he's lying in bed and thinking that he could help other people because something happened. And what happened is he took a series of actions that he necessarily didn't believe in, but he saw his friend has happened to him, and he took the action. Adam, why don't you recap a little bit more about the good doctor here?
Yeah, when I go through this part with a newcomer, and when I look at, like we have a saying, if everybody came to AA stayed, we'd be in a football field. This first statement where it says, we believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery. I stop them right there and I say, are you interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery outlined in this book? And I stop them and I make sure that they are. Because if they don't believe that after their experience that what they've witnessed in Alcoholics Anonymous, that there's hope here, they probably won't continue. So back to that, and where it says witnessed or returned to health in that same paragraph, have you seen people that look like they've recovered when you come to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? Because when you walk into a room, a lot of people will say that second step happens right when they walk in the room. I will debate that. But at the same time, when you see people that have recovered, you see people in AA, in large groups of people that are taking chips and taking cakes, you are a witness to that part of recovery. So all of that is very, very important. I really go through all of these, just like Ralph said, and I ask these questions. I ask them, are they hopeless? And what I mean by that, has every method that they've tried up to this point failed them? Have they tried to stay stopped on their own? Have they seen that hopelessness? And that word hopelessness, because hope doesn't matter to an alcoholic until they're hopeless. If I have any other imaginable remedy, typically I'm going to defend my right to drink. And this is a really critical part going through this with a newcomer. And if you're new, remember this. My sponsor said to me going through this book that the purpose of going through the doctor's opinion or any other part of the big book wasn't so much for me. He said it was for me to be able to work with others, that the 12 steps are very much like the face of a clock, that when I'm in 12, I better be in one with a newcomer. And by doing that, like we say, the reason the grass is greener, it's because they're watering it. So as I go through this, I'm going to start to revisit, especially in this part of the book, a term which is going to be called the phenomenon of craving. And what we're kind of looking at is it's almost like the genetics loads the gun, that dysfunction pulls the trigger. You're going to see the genetic factor here all the way through this chapter. So, Ralph, do you want to keep going, or should I read the next part?
Sure. Have recovered. I personally, here's the doctor testifying, have known scores of cases who were of the type other methods failed completely. And myself, I've had several types that have just utterly failed completely. These facts to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of the rapid and inherent to this group, which mark a new epoch of annals of alcoholism. These men, it's hard not even to think about this when it's written. These men may well have the remedy for which thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. And if you think about this, here you have the number one doctor at these times for alcohol and drugs saying that about us, alcoholics. Think about that. That's pretty powerful stuff. The physician who, at our request, gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered the alcoholic torture must believe. And there's a question mark there. Did I suffer alcoholic torture? Did I start to drink and experience this agitation when there was no more alcohol available? Was I physically discomforted? You know, because right now it covers both, but right now we're just really talking about what happens once we introduce alcohol to our body. The body of the alcoholic is quite is quite as normal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we cannot control our drinking. Question mark. Can I control my drinking? Just because I was maladjusted to life, that I was in full flight from reality, or I had some outright mental defectiveness. And the mental defectiveness for me was the delusion that this time it was going to be different. You know, you hear a lot of people say, you know how you can tell an alcoholic's lying, his lips are moving. And that's not my experience. And when I told my mother that I'm done, just get me out of here, Mom, on what? Never do it again. I meant it. Sometimes with tears in my eyes, you know, or my girlfriend, you blow the rent money one more time. That's it. We're done. I did not know that I was suffering from a lack of power situation. We're not talking about the power of choice now. We're talking about what happens when I start to drink. Okay. These things were true to some extent. Yeah, it was crazy. In fact, to considerable extent with us. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. It is our belief that any picture of the alcoholics who leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. And if you're taking notes or highlighting, you're going to highlight that whole area there which talks about the body. Adam, why don't you take over the next paragraph on the theory?
Yeah, I just want to talk about this. When I went through this part of the book about we don't use the word yet phenomenon of craving. He's going to use that later. But this really developed into what we call the disease model in the clinical study of alcoholism. It was kind of a novel concept at that time. This thing about the body being as abnormal as the mind. So I've got a body that can't process alcohol. Later, he's going to imply that I have a mind that cannot process reality. Two different ideas. So it's very important that I really look at this. This thing about being in full flight from reality, that typically starts to look at me defending my right to drink. The first half of step one, me defending my right to drink. The rest of the program, me defending my right to arrange life to suit myself. And that really is the two sides of it. And it's very critical that I really understand what they're saying there. So I start to look at as an outright mental defective. When you're working with new people, you might suggest how they justify, rationalize, and minimize that first drink. It's very important to bring that to the forefront of this part of the book. And all of these can be turned into questions as you go through this. Am I in full flight from reality? And so forth. Do I believe that my body is also as sick as my mind? Going through this. So the next part of it, the doctor's theory that we have an allergy interested. Does it interest me? There's the question. Does it interest me that why I said I was going to go only out for 2 drinks and I ended up coming home a week later or waking up in Las Vegas or so forth? How many times I said I was going to just do something and not be able to control the amount I take. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, am I an ex-problem drinker? I can say this explanation makes good sense. So when I'm matching up this idea with how many times I made that promise to just have 2 drinks or to stop at some point, it's very important to see that I lost control, because this is really about control. It explains many things for which we can not otherwise account. So I'm asking that question as I'm going through this. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as altruistic plane, meaning absence of profit motive, okay, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. And that is something that is critical. I mean, I can see that Dr. Silkworth is going to endorse his industry. But at the same time, I believe that treatment does have its rightful place in the process of recovery. And this is really explaining that for some people, it is absolutely imperative. It is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, that he has a better chance of understanding, accepting what we have to offer. So I would ask those questions. Do you understand a little bit about what we're talking about? Are you clear on these ideas? And are you open to accepting this solution to alcoholism? Because that's really what this is. So, Ralph, do you want to go from there?
Yeah, I just want to recap that sentence. It says it explains many things which cannot otherwise account, just for some people that might not understand what we're talking about with the craving. I'll give you a quick example. I'm home minding my own business. I'm always minding my business. My friend calls me, says, hey, come down and watch the game. I'm like, I can't. I got to work tomorrow. He goes, what time you got to work? I said, 9 o'clock. He goes, the Yankees come on at 7. Come down, have a beer. I'll buy you a roast beef sandwich. Now, I vaguely sense it wasn't a good idea, but I went down there to have a beer, maybe 2. But see, something happens when a guy like me takes a beer, because somewhere between the second or third beer, this physical craving starts to take place where my body says more, more, more. Next thing you know, the lights are coming on. It's last call, and I'm out to Bridgeport for our outside issue. Another job gone. Now, I told myself, oh, Jimmy's here now. Jimmy just came in. Let me wait until the game's over, or let's play some of that bowling, or let's go talk to these girls. I'm thinking that it's a mental thing, that I'm just changing my mind. I'm starting to think that, you know what, I don't really like that job that much anyways. So I'm starting to think that it's a mental thing, and it's not. My body's physically craving more alcohol. So if you've had any of these instances where you thought you were changing your mind and you're an alcoholic, once you started to drink, I didn't have the power to stop. The body kept saying more, 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 and it tricks my mind into believing it. It's a very important part, because the mind is out of it once we start to drink. So, all right, Adam.
No, I mean, my experience is exactly the same. And for the people that suffer from addiction as well as alcoholism, my experience with this is that once an alcoholic or an addict has lost control in one area, typically we've lost control in all areas. And what happens is people typically play musical poisons in the first half of step 1. They put down the drink, and then they pick up a pipe, they put down the pipe, and they start to like try to control and manage that first half of step 1. And you see a lot of people die. Like with addicts, I tell them, they'll look, I tell them to look down in that beer. I guarantee they'll see a rock at the bottom of it. You know what I mean? Because somehow they live in that type of delusion. And my experience with this is the only way to win the game is not to play. And the only way not to play is to start to adapt these type of principles in my life. That's the only way that I'm ever going to be able to stay stopped. Because if alcohol is the problem, the solution is abstinence. And what he's saying here, we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as altruistic plane. It's telling you that the solution here is actually going to be spiritual. Okay? And this is written, coming forward towards a doctor's opinion. This guy is a clinical doctor. He's an MD. And he's going to start talking about things that he can't really solve. And he's going to talk about his experience with people like us. And it's very important to pay attention to some of these ideas if you're new, because, and I'm going to just say one last thing about the doctor's opinion. I don't want to be offensive. One of my friends said, Adam, you're going to become an expert at the doctor's opinion. And I said, what does that mean? And he says, well, you'll read the doctor's opinion to a new guy, and by the time he gets to Bill's story, he'll have a career. By the time he gets to a solution, he'll be in love. And by the time he gets to more about alcoholism, he won't need AA. And what happens is we'll see a lot of people that'll meet us, and we'll sit down and we'll read them the doctor's opinion, maybe an hour before a meeting that we're going to. And slowly as their life starts to come together, they lose sight of altruism. They lose sight of this spiritual solution. And they get caught up in what we call money, property, and prestige. And a lot of those people die. And I think it's really, really important to try to help them to understand how important it is at this point to develop a foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous that's unshakable. Because if they don't have it here, none of this is going to matter later. That's why I said it's so important to ask that question. Do I believe in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery outlined right here? Because if they don't have this foundation and they don't trust that we have a solution to this, you think they're going to get to a 9th step? Not a chance.
Well, and I think it's important, if you look on the doctor's opinion, it's signed William D. Silkworth, MD. And if you ever seen one of the study guides, or if you ever looked at a first edition, he didn't sign this book the first time. And because he couldn't really back it up, and he knew something was different, which is so cool that he knew that us alcoholics were different. But by the time the second edition came out and science had actually caught up and said, yes, this is true, now he said, now you can put my name in the book. But, and what we're talking about, the spiritual plane, we're going to get into that later, but it's the spiritual malady, which we're not talking about today, which triggers the mental obsession, which sets off the physical craving. But today we're concentrating mostly on a little bit of everything, but mostly what happens to you, what happens to me when I pick up alcohol. All right, so continuing on the top of the next page, the doctor writes another letter. Would you like me to read, Adam, or you want to read?
Please, go ahead and start.
The subject presented in this book seems to be of the paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years as a medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country of treating alcoholic and drug addiction. And that hospital, for those history buffs, is Towns Hospital. Okay. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on the subject, which is covered so masterfully detailed in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. With our ultramatic modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic nature. And here's the doctor, one of the best doctors in the world, the leading doctor in the world, saying that, yeah, you alcoholics are different. And with all our stuff that we do with moral psychology, perhaps we aren't well equipped to handle this. And even to think about it, doctors have egos the size of the Brooklyn Bridge. And here's this doctor saying there's something different about alcoholics. Now, Adam's going to read that same paragraph a little different. Go ahead, Adam. You want to read
the same paragraph?
Read it different.
Okay. The subject presented in this book seems to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcohol addiction. I asked them, is it important to you? I'm going to sit and ask that guy, how important is this to you? Is this life or death to you? I'm going to sit with them because I want to find out if they're sincere or not. I'm going to work with them anyway, but I'm trying to help them to see that this is a life and death thing. There was a real sense of satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail. For a double board certified physician to say masterly detail, I think is a huge, huge thing for him to say about, a layman. I mean, Bill Wilson was a stock speculator. So he really was very impressed with the work when he read this book. And it's really, really important because at the bottom of this, I have something that I wrote. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics. If you look up the word moral psychology, one of the dictionary definitions of that is a combination of philosophy and psychology. That's what it is. Okay? Is it of urgent importance to me? But its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. Now, this is where he's basically saying, and under this paragraph, I have in big letters, I cannot fix you. Think about what he's actually saying here. He's saying with all his ultra-modern standards, and believe me, after 28 trips through treatment with the best MFTs, the best psychiatrists, the best drug and alcohol counselors that money had to buy, I couldn't make it past a liquor store when I walked out of treatment. I couldn't make it past a liquor store. That's how effective they were, okay? He says, with all our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach, okay, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good. I like to throw, and a lot of people throw in here, the power of God. If you're a believer, you're a believer. If you're not, let it be the power of love. Let it be the power of the collective consciousness of the group. And I'll tell you, I was playing Trivial Pursuit with a bunch of junkies in rehab, and there was about 60 of us. And because I was a know-it-all, well-educated, and I noticed in that group that there was a guy in the back that knew all about entertainment. There was a historian on the other side of the room. There were a couple of scientists, and I saw this group of addicts ace that game. They aced Trivial Pursuit. And I realize that in the beginning, for some of us, if you can't grasp the concept of a God, can you grasp the collective consciousness of a group of us that are working towards recovery, that are doing something here that none of us could do by ourselves? If you can let that be something that you're open-minded to at this point, it might be just enough to save your life. So he said that we are not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. And again, I did write in that part of my book, I Can't Fix You. One other thing to note here is that Towns Hospital in 1935 cost $350. I don't know if you know this, Ralph, but gas was 19 cents a gallon. So the multiplicity rate is 20, which means it was $6,000 a week. That's how much it was. You multiply that by 4, it's about the same as Betty Ford, $30,000 a month.
Yep.
It wasn't cheap. I think Bill Wilson's wife's husband paid for it.
Yeah, brother-in-law. Yeah.
Oh.
Many years ago, one of the leading contributors in this book came under the care of this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. That's highlighted. You hear people say, when should I start working the steps? When should I start working with people? Oh, you got to be sober a year, 2 years before you start working with people. At once. Key word, at once. It's a call to action. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell the story to other patients here. And with some misgivings, we consented. You think about this. The #1 hospital in the world's got a drunk that's been there 3 times that seems to have come up with these ideas. That's telling the doctor that, yeah, I've had this white light experience. It was like God spoke to me and this and that. Think about how lucky we are that the doctor didn't just say, here, Bill, take this. You know what I'm saying? And give him a pill or something. But he said to go with it. And then he went with it because we're here because he went with it. And he saw such a change in Bill that with some misgivings that he allowed us in. And I'm only here today because I was sitting in a treatment center, a DOC treatment center in the summer of 2001, when a man came in on a Friday night in the rain, pouring rain, and brought a meeting into the treatment center. And that's what Bill did. He started sharing this message and started passing it on. Later, he requested, these cases which have followed have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. Again, it's a doctor saying that these are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we come to know them, their entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who was labored long and weary in this alcoholic field. So, you hear people say another, something that's not necessarily true. Oh, it's a selfish program. No, it doesn't say that in the book. It says we got to get rid of self. It says these men have come to the absence of profit and their community spirit. That's the fellowship, getting involved and helping people. That's the byproduct of doing this work, is an overwhelming desire to want to tell people about it, to want to share it with people. And, who has labored long and weary in this field. He's seen so many heartbreaking things happen, and yet he's starting to see hope here with Bill. They believe in themselves and still more in the power with a capital P. When he talks about with a capital P, he's talking about a power, a higher power of your understanding. If there's 73 people in this meeting, there could be 73 different higher powers. Alcoholics Anonymous isn't interested in proving the existence of any God, but the absolute need of a God in your life. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Adam?
What's really interesting about this is when you think about what Bill really knew in 1935, when Bill called Dr. Silkworth and he says, I've got this idea. I'd like to come back and talk to some of the patients. All Bill really knew was the experience he had had with Ebby. And that experience, as we're going to realize later, was that Ebby was worse. He was one of those drunks that was so much worse than him that when he asked Ebby to have a drink with him and Ebby didn't want to drink, he was so impressed with that Ebby had taken him through a very simple process that showed him some fundamental ideas: surrender, catharsis, restitution, and service. Fundamental framework ideas that were slowly adapted into the 12 steps. We'll talk about the history of the Oxford group later. There's a lot of history that really shows us the things that block us from a spiritual experience in detail. But if you really think about it, Probably 80% of the people on this platform tonight that are listening to this know more about Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps and the solution than Bill knew at that time. And I always ask people, what's stopping you? What's stopping you from reaching back and maybe walking somebody through this process? Maybe just reading them the doctor's opinion like a kindergartner, using this tool to help them. And what happens by doing that somehow is it's empowering. The word intimacy is into me, I see. And what happened with Bill through this process is not only did he recover, but people started recovering around him like wildfire. And it was like this thing that just started to duplicate itself exponentially. And Silkworth was amazed by that. The power of this thing. If you don't believe AA works, and I've said this many times, go check out a world convention. Look at 80,000 of us coming from all over the world. And that's just a piece of it. That's just a small part of what this thing actually represents. So if you're new, I think this part of the book is really, really, really important. And do I believe in this power that pulls chronic alcoholics back? Am I a chronic alcoholic? Do I have any other solution? Again, these questions all the way through this. You know, am I amazed with what I've seen in Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm absolutely amazed. I see people come here the day before they died and have beautiful lives. When I start to see that, when I really listen, if you don't believe in life after death, you might be looking at it in Alcoholics Anonymous right now. And Silkworth was amazed with that. I'm amazed with it. And if you get the privilege of working with new people with this tool that we're talking about right now, you will be 10 times as amazed as you are right now. And Ralph and I talk about that all the time. We see guys come in on death stories. It's not just the guy that crawls out of the dumpster that's now running IBM. It's more than that. It's the one that becomes a good dad, becomes a great son, becomes, you know, just a good person and starts helping other people. These are the things that you see going through this process. This is an amazing thing. And Silkworth was amazed with it. Ralph, please continue.
Okay, we're going to recap one more thing on that. On the bottom of, if you go to 14 for a second, the bottom of the page, while it says, while I lay in the hospital, it's on 14. Here's what we're talking about. It says, while I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to what I have seen and be so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. Then in turn, they might work with others. We're here tonight all over the world because this man was in a hospital bed after taking a series of actions that he saw his friend had changed. And that's pretty freaking cool, people. Pretty freaking cool. And then again, the bill starts to repeat himself here. The doctor starts to repeat himself, and you're going to find, you say, didn't I read that before? And that's the way a lot of good writers write. They repeat stuff. It says, of course, the alcoholic ought to be freed from physical craving for liquor. This often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. But what I write there is before spiritual measures could be of maximum benefit. Spiritual measures, because this is a spiritual program, not a psychological one. There's no chapter called Into Thinking. It's called Into Action. So this next paragraph's all highlighted. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics, there's that word chronic again, is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomena of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinkers. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form, and once having formed the habit, they found they cannot break it. Once they've lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon human things, their problems pile up on them and become so astonishingly difficult to solve. And there's so many statements and so many questions that we ask the newcomer, ask yourself about these inconsistencies. And this is the first time he uses the word phenomena. And now, you know, the phenomena is something that's unexplainable. Oh, he's a phenomenal pitcher, he's a phenomenal boxer, whatever. But now science has actually clarified and found out that an alcoholic, the body of an alcoholic, we do have an allergy, which we physically crave more booze. And this is the first time anywhere that science, anywhere written word that they've come up with that. But, you know, these allergic types, you can't make an alcoholic. It's not causable. Either you have the allergy or you don't. And it says these allergic types can never use alcohol in any form at all. Do I believe I could use alcohol if informed? Has the habit been formed? Could I not break it? Do I want to stop, but I can't? These are all questions that you could write in your book. Their reliance upon things human. Their reliance upon things human. Their problems pile up on them. Have your piled up on you. They become astonishingly difficult to solve. And here's one of the sentences you hear a lot read. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Adam, talk to me about some frothy emotional appeal, please.
It's that same old thing. Why can't you just stop? And really, it almost sounds like some of the things that Harry Tiebout talks about. There's this thing about people giving you all this emotion about trying to get you to stop it. I think it's more important to go back and talk about the craving. The craving is something that when it says the craving for liquor, you're going to see as we go through this. I have people I work with circle the word craving all the way through this part of the book. It's going to be all the way through. And it's very interesting because without like jumping ahead, when you look at Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob had a connection with the Oxford group, and he understood a lot of the spiritual parts of the solution. He did not understand this craving. This craving at that time was, like they said, of extreme medical importance, because before this idea of a craving, this allergy of the body, this genetic part of alcoholism was really something that people talked about and became aware of. It was almost more difficult to solve the problem of alcoholism. So, I'm going through this and I'm asking them if they can see, are they a chronic alcoholic? Do they have a permanent condition where it's almost like a diabetic? I ask people, when does a diabetic not have to take the insulin? When does a cancer patient not have to do the chemo? If I'm a chronic alcoholic, I really only have a couple of choices here. So I'm like kind of black and white. There's no really middle of the road here. So going through this again, am I the allergic type? And the next question, can I safely use alcohol in any form at all? Now, remember, Dr. Silkworth was also treated addiction. So there's a lot of freeze-dried forms of alcohol. I know a lot of people that somehow think that they can do something else other than alcohol. And again, it becomes very important to go back to that same question, any form at all. And I'm not talking about hand sanitizer, okay? Once having formed the habit, did I form the habit? There's another question if you're new, I'm going to ask a newcomer. And I know we're just reiterating what Ralph just said. But again, can I break this habit on my own? There's the question. Have I lost my self-confidence? Have my reliance upon things human failed me? Do my problems pile up on me and become astonishing? And then that piece that Ralph said, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. That means all the people that had appealed to me with emotion. Why can't you just stop? Why can't you stop for her? I can't believe you gave up your education, your career, everything that was worthwhile in your life. Remember those commercials, Ralph, where they used to have these commercials with drugs, like, would you give up your relationship for me? And you're like, yes. Would you give up your family for me? Absolutely. Would you give up your career? Absolutely. And then it says, call care unit. It's like, that's pretty much what this is. The message which can interest these alcoholics must have depth and weight. It means that it can't be surface. It must be substantial. We have to win the confidence by looking at the symptoms. A lot of times in AA, we got caught up in the stories and not the symptoms. So it says, in nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they to recreate their lives. One of the things I say is, you can't recover with the mind that got you here. And I ask them this question, can you believe in a power other than yourself? Part of agnosticism is believing in principles or believing in God and then living like there isn't one. And part of this idea here is I have been the authority in my own life. And if you're new, the question is, can I come to a believe in a power other than myself? Am I willing to give myself to these simple ideas so that maybe I can find a solution to my problem? And do I want to recreate my life or have a new life? There's the question. So do you want to keep going, Ralph?
Sure. If any field that has psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear to be somewhat sentimental. Let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder what we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel, after many years' experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men and women and their altruistic moment now growing amongst them. And that is just so powerful. Here's the doctor talking again, and I've seen thousands of men. I think he took care of 40,000 when he worked at Towns Hospital and another 9,000 when he went to Knickerbocker Hospital later on. And that's just unbelievable. That here's a man, the greatest, the specialist, saying that these guys are onto something. And the question is, does this interest you? And here is the first time we're going to talk about this. And if you've been sober for a while, obviously it still applies to drinking, but you could substitute that word drink with anything. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. You could say the same thing with anger. You could say the same thing with food. You could say the same thing with shopping, anything that's blocking you from your higher power. But here's the first definition of why we drink. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. ? The ascension is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, ? they cannot after a time differentiate the truth from the false, ? To them, their alcoholic life seems like the only normal one, ? They are restless, irritable, and discontent unless they could again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, ? Drinks which they see others taking with impunity, ? After they succumb to the desire again, that's what they're talking about, the mental part right there. After they've giving in to the mental, okay, I'm not going to drink, all of a sudden taking a drink seems like the greatest idea in the world. Once they take the drink, succumb to the desire, as so many do, the phenomena of craving develops. That's what I was talking about when I went to the Redwood that night for a couple beers. I succumbed to the desire. But after that, the phenomena of craving develops, and they pass through well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolve not to drink again. I'm never going to do this again. This is repeated over and over again, and unless a person could experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. In other words, hopeless. And what we're talking about is the restless, irritable, discontent part. That's what we're talking about, the internal part, not the external unmanageabilities, the internal unmanageabilities, not being able to control my emotional nature, being prey to depression, feeling uselessness, being full of fear. My mental condition, my spirituality, my internal conditions triggers that mental obsession because I got a mind that always takes me back to alcohol, which then sets off the phenomena of craving, which makes it virtually impossible for me to stop, which just continues again and again and again. Adam?
Going back to where it says, if any feel that a psychiatrist directing a hospital for alcoholics, if you look at that paragraph, and I'm not going to reread it, he's explaining again the hopelessness that he's had watching people, watching, the children and the despairing wives and the tragedies and feeling helpless. He's telling you again that he cannot fix this. And if you really look at it, what's so interesting is I've been around the therapeutic community for many, many years. I know a lot of people that work in this industry, and any therapist that's worth their weight will tell you this one truth, that it is said that Alcoholics Anonymous works the best for the most. There are other ways that people do recover, but the majority of people with long-term recovery that are also happy, the majority of them that we can see have done it through the 12 steps. There's other people that have succeeded in other ways, but like he said, and like I've heard all over the therapeutic community, they all know that this works the best for the most. And my sponsor said, it doesn't matter who's wrong. It doesn't matter who's right. It just matters who's left. And when I look at people with long-term recovery that are chasing their dreams, that have relationships that work, I have to start to pay attention to what they're doing. So it's very, very important when he says that we feel after many years of experience, and I'm still on the bottom of that paragraph, we have found nothing that that has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men or women than the altruistic, again, absence of profit motive movement that is now growing up among them. And this piece here, you know, everyone drinks for the effect produced by alcohol. A lot of people because it has a sedating effect. Alcohol is classified by the AMA as a depressant. 9 out of 10 people have a drink and they say stuff like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling it. I have a couple drinks and I want to get married. I want to go to Vegas. I'm trying to find the car keys I hid for myself before the first drink. See, for me, alcohol is a stimulant. And that's part of what makes me bodily and mentally different from my fellows. It's not just how much I drink or how often I drink, but that effect produced in me is so elusive that, like it says, I cannot differentiate the true from the false. Very simply, if you're new, it seems to do so much for me that I don't care what it's doing to me. And that's what the earth people can't figure out about us. They can't figure out why we drink. We can't figure out why you don't. So the next piece of this, I cannot differentiate the true from the false. My alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. What's very important here is this, is I don't know if Silkworth knew how powerful this was. But when he talks about restless, irritable, and discontent, I put there restlessness of the body, irritability of the mind, discontent of the spirit. Because if you really look at it, those are the 3 parts of this disease. The mind is irritable. I have a fault-finding mind. I have a kind of a restlessness. I think there's a new word for restless. It's called ADD. But I don't have ADD. Because if Ralph had $1 million in the trunk of his car, I'd probably follow him home from the meeting. I have what's called selective interest disorder. I'm only interested in things that concern me. You cannot be as obsessive about a drink or about any other thing that my mind locks onto and have ADD. I have selective interest disorder. It's very important to understand this. But I have a restlessness in a different way. And I have a discontent spirit. And if you really look at the remedy, to cut to the chase, 10, 11, and 12, 10 treats the mind. 11, be still and know that I am God, treats the body. And 12 treats the spirit. So parallel to restless, irritable, and discontent is this interface of 10, 11, and 12, which later is the solution. And just talking about it right here is not going to get you there. If you think just having this knowledge enough, there has to be a working process that'll get me to a place where I have the application of these. So I start to understand those pieces. Someone's phone. Okay. This is also, and I'll finish with this because I don't want to take up too much time. This is also known as what we call the cycle of addiction. Again, a gold standard in the therapeutic community. Drink, craving, spree, emerging remorseful, swearing off forever, repeating the cycle. So if I don't understand and see this, I would walk through like Ralph had said, every one of these is a question. Do I see the phenomenon of craving in this part of the book? Do I emerge remorseful? Do I swear off forever and then go back to restless, irritable, and discontent? Do I see that drives me back to the obsession? And Ralph said it earlier, the obsession drives me to the allergy, and the allergy kills me. So suddenly I realize I can't live with alcohol, but somehow I can't live without it. So you're starting to see both sides of it now. Is that clear? Okay, shall we go on or should we stop here? We got about 5 minutes. Do we want to open it up for questions, or we just want to run through another paragraph?
Well, you wanted to do half. We're over half, so I guess we can stop.
Let's stop then. Okay. There's a lot more to talk about next week then. Does anybody have any brief, pertinent questions on this? We're just here to be helpful. I want everyone to know if we went too fast, there's going to be an audio of this that you can go back and go through each piece of this, highlighting and putting question marks. So those questions you can use with new people. Again, this is just a tool to work with new people. We're just trying to be helpful. Both Ralph and I have worked with a lot of new people with this book, and we're not experts. We're just trying to be helpful. Maybe we can look in the chat and see if there's any questions.
If you have a question, raise the blue hand.
Go ahead, Rodney.
If you have a question, raise your blue hand and we'll
Drew has a question. Unmute.
Maybe you could just talk about compulsive thinking about self. And I know Alcoholics Anonymous has gave me great relief from that. I'm super grateful. If you can tie that in maybe to.
Well, we're not there yet. When we start talking about working with others, when it says in the book we have entered the world of the spirit in the 10th step, I was asked, what does that mean? And it means we've exited the world of self, Drew. By the time we get to that part of the book, we will see selfishness, self-centeredness. That is the root of the trouble. And then it'll start to show us the solution, other-centeredness, God-centeredness, service-centeredness. So we're not even there right now. That's why the doctor's opinion is primarily focused on the craving. It's a little premature for that, but it's always an issue, if that makes any sense. Thank you.
Go ahead, Timothy.
Yeah, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Timothy.
Hi, Timothy.
Where it says, I say this after many years of experience as a mental director. Therefore, I had a real sense of satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. Now, I've heard that this thing was written at an 8th grade level. What's the real validity on that, if anyone knows? That this book was written at an 8th grade level. In the way that the doctor describes it, is written in such masterly detail.
Well, I think it's pretty simple, but he was so impressed with the text that was his opinion, that it was written in masterly detail because it contains a solution to alcoholism. I think it's any deeper than that. I mean, there are some technical parts of the 4th step which are kind of advanced psychology. Esteem, pride, security, projected self, perceived self. Those are kind of deep concepts. But I think this is something that anybody with the fundamental understanding of the English language can interpret. Typically, it's better to be used with a sponsor. I had a college education and I couldn't do this on my own. I had to go through this book with a sponsor who helped me to turn the statements into questions, which is called a Socratic method of teaching. They use it in law, but that's what the fundamental directions in this book are, to see if I have an experience with each of these statements. So maybe it is at a very simple level, but these concepts are as old as man himself. This is a spiritual solution to alcoholism, which most of us will absolutely stake on our lives on, that works. And you know it. If you're here right now, you believe that this will work for you. A lot of people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
God bless you. Thank you, Timothy.
And this group hasn't changed in 85 years.
Go ahead.
Thank everybody. I hope that we haven't put anyone to sleep today.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I thank you. I'm Wendy Alcoholic.
Hi, Wendy.
You did a parallelism, I think that's a word, to irritable, discontent, and restless. Could you just briefly say that again? Because it was so fast. And I know I could do the recording, but if you could say it, that would be great.
Yeah, I always questioned whether or not Silkworth really knew when he said restless, irritable, and discontent, that those are parallel with mind, body, and spirit. That the mind is irritable. I have a fault-finding mind. If I really look at step 10, it is part of the program of me watching this selfishness, this attitude, the lies I tell myself, the fear, my faulty relationship with God, and my resentment, which is my attachment, to watch for those vigilantly, to discuss them with someone immediately, which is transparency, to be accountable and set wrong any rights. And then in 11, what we talk about is 3 types of prayers: contemplative, petitionary, and centering. But the most important in 11 is the centering prayer. Okay? And then the third piece, which treats the spirit, is service, is reaching back and helping others. So my body is that centerpiece in 11. I'm quietening my body. So restlessness is the body, irritability is the mind, and the spirit is discontent. And what I said was, if you really look at 10, 11, and 12, they seem to remedy those three distortions of mind, body, and spirit. It really goes back to the triangle, which Ralph and I started with: mind, body, and spirit. Contribute, belong, and learn. The steps bring me wisdom. The fellowship where two or more are gathered bring me power. And service shows me how to give and receive love. These three ideas are all kind of built into the doctor's opinion, since we're coming back to this. Altruism, the unconditional concern for another's spiritual growth with no question of money. That's really what love is. The unconditional concern for another's spiritual growth. Where two or more are gathered, there I am in the midst. That's what Dr. Silkworth said here. He said that when Bill started working with people, suddenly there was this empowerment that he'd never seen before. This thing of love, of duplication. When drunks started helping each other, we are the most chastised people in the world. And suddenly you see this power come from a place where we were the most, we're the outcast. Alcoholics have been, ridiculed for centuries. And all of a sudden you see the most amazing, loving, helpful, kind, supportive, generous people coming from a near-death experience, and we're duplicating that. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is giving us a roadmap to spiritual success that can bring about this kind of change. It's the most powerful thing in the world. Sorry about that, but I get excited about it. I really believe in it.
Okay, we got one more. We'll squeeze it in and then pass it over to Jess. Go ahead, Connie.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Connie. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Connie.
And in this reading that Ralph did, that he said that a few years ago that the action of the alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class. He said in there, and I caught it, that he said that you cannot, and I want to get it clarified, you cannot be a self-made alcoholic. It's in your genes.
No, it's not causable. Either you have an allergy when you introduce alcohol to your body, or you don't. That's my experience. That's why when you're out with certain people and they have one beer, two beers, maybe at the third beer, they say, whoa, I'm starting to feel this, and they stop. And if a non-alcoholic keeps drinking, it's going to come back up. Their bodies react much different than ours. Our bodies say we want more, we want more, we want more. We're seemingly changing our mind, but it's really our body physically craving that. So what makes me an alcoholic isn't how much I drank, it's what happens when I drink, that my body physically craves more. Yeah. You understand that?
Thanks, Ralph. Okay, I think that's it for tonight. We'll turn it over to Jess.
Excellent. Great.